All right. We'll call to order the August 15th meeting of the Murray City Planning Commission. I'd like to welcome all of you this evening, and we'll introduce our commissioners to you from your right. Scott Woodbury, Travis Ney, Phil Markham, myself, Ned Hacker, Sue Wilson, and Lisa Milkevich. And our staff, we have Jared Hall and Zach Smallwood and Brent Farnsworth in the back. So welcome.
And excuse Maren Patterson.
And excuse Maren Patterson. Thank you. A couple of housekeeping items for the audience tonight. Be respectful of each other. If you have electronic devices, I'd ask that you turn them off or turn them down. Make sure that we do that same thing. If you have a conversation, I'd ask you to take it out in the hallway and respect the time of the others who are here this evening. And if you are going to make comments regarding one of our agenda items, we'd give you 3 minutes as a individual, and if you represent a group of people, 5 minutes to speak to the commission. So with that, we'll go to agenda item number 1, approval of the Planning Commission meeting minutes from July 18th and August 1st.
Do we need a separate motion for each of them, or can we approve both of them in one motion?
Here, we'll just make it easy. We'll do them both we'll do
We
them
can do it at
separately.
the same time. We've done that
We
before.
can do them at the same time.
All right.
Let's do it.
All right, so we'll do them together. July 18th, August 1st. Comments on either of those?
No.
No, they
All
look
right,
good.
then I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes from the July 18th, 2019 Planning Commission meeting, as well as the August 1st, 2019 Planning Commission meeting.
I'll second.
Have a motion, a second. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes. Item 2, conflict of interest. Do any commissioners have conflict of interest with any items on the agenda this evening?
No.
No.
Nope.
And item 3, findings of fact. There are no findings of fact from our previous meetings, so we'll move to agenda item number 4, which is Mount Liberty College requesting approval for a conditional use permit to allow a liberal arts college to be located on the property addressed 5286 South Commerce Drive, Suite A136. And is the applicant here this evening? Great, we'll have you come up in a little bit. And Zach Smallwood is going to give our staff report.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everybody. So this is a conditional use application, like you said, for Mount Liberty College. They're located at 5286 South Commerce Drive, just north of 5300 South and adjacent to I-15, taking up a fairly small suite, 356 square feet, that allows about two rooms within that suite. You can see that highlighted here on letter A, right there. Again, here's the suite, kind of showing a little bit more detailed view. I believe they're taking these two parts here, and then access to restrooms and things are located just right outside the suite there. I guess I could have just gone to the next slide and it would show you exactly what rooms instead of me talking about it. So just a few photos of the site. It's pretty well kept. No real issues from planning staff here. They propose to have a max of 20 students going forward at this time. And they had originally signed a 1-year lease, so they're looking to, if they decide to expand and need further stuff, they may need to leave this location. But that's entirely up to them. One of the conditions I put on the report would help address that to give a little bit of buffering. So if they do get more than 20 students, I put in a request or a condition that they stagger the classes so that there's enough time for everybody to leave and arrive if they do buy a vehicle. So with that, pretty basic, we are recommending that you approve this conditional use, subject to the 6 conditions before you. Is there any questions I can answer?
Straightforward.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you. Would the applicant come forward, please? State your name and your address for the record.
Dr. Jennifer Jensen. I live in Draper, 11632 Bear Canyon Drive.
And have you had an opportunity to read the conditions for approval?
No, I was just reading them actually. I mean, I didn't know there was such a thing as a sign permit. I think that the people who own the building I just don't know anything about it. I thought they took care of that,
Okay,
so I don't know.
so those conditions, you'll have to abide by those conditions
Okay.
in order to proceed. So-
All right. And I actually have one question. If we did get bigger and wanted to move into a bigger space in the same set of buildings, is it possible that this conditional use permit could be for any of the same building? Does that make sense? Rather than just having to redo it, just moving next door? Because it would be the same parking, the same.
We can answer that.
We'll have staff address that, but
Okay.
Okay.
Just a question.
Do you have any additional information about your project?
Well, we're just a brand new liberal arts school, kind of like Hillsdale, if you've heard of Hillsdale, or St. John's, and we felt like there needed to be one here in Utah. We didn't have anything like that here, and so we decided to try. We were actually located in Salt Lake City, and then that fell through. There were some problems with that lease, and so that's why it's kind of this time of the year. It would have been a long time ago if we had our way. But we actually like this space better, so that part works. But so we're just really small. We're just barely starting. We have one freshman class coming in this fall, so all we have is freshmen. And like I said, the max we were going to get was 20. We are not there yet, so we have about 10 or 11 so far. So we're definitely, for this year, we're definitely not going to hit over the 20.
Okay. All right. Any questions from commissioners?
I don't think so.
All right.
I don't think so.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
And so I will open this.
Do you want to have Zach address?
Yeah, let me open this for public comment, and then Zach can address.
We can do it that way.
Okay.
I'll open this agenda item for public comment. If there are any people in the audience who would like to comment, this is your opportunity. And seeing none, I'll close public comment period and ask Zach to address the applicant's question about expanding.
Yeah, there's a couple things I wanted to address just to let the commission aware. We would have sent out a packet to the applicant to the address that we had on file, which is the 11632 Bear Canyon Drive in Draper. And then we also would have emailed that to her as well. So that way we know that Susan's really diligent about that. I was trying to find the email to make sure that it went to the correct email that we had on the application, just to address that. But unfortunately, the way our land use ordinance is currently, the way we administer conditional use permit applications is that if they were to go to a different suite, it would require a different conditional use permit unless there had been one there prior. So, for example, if they were to take up the space that the University of Utah had, that may have had a conditional use permit at that time. I'm not sure without doing some further research, but then they would be able to just go into that suite if it had one at some point.
Mr. Smallwood, could you expand on that just a tad bit? The
Sure.
reasoning for that is, I just feel like it's important for the applicant and the community to know that we asked for that so that we have a safe environment following all, and they're aware of all the policies. and
Correct.
procedures.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we do. Maybe Jared would be best at answering this one because I'm not 100% sure why we do it on specific suites. And
It is, code compliance, right? Make sure
Yeah,
everyone's in
and mostly
compliance
it's
with
the code and how it's been administered up to this point. It's been each suite has to have its own conditional use permit.
All right, any other questions?
There was a question about signs.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Sorry. And yes, thank you. The sign is typically would be managed, if it's like the monument sign, that probably is managed through the property owner. However, if they were going to put some sort of wall sign or something like that, it's a pretty standard condition that's in most of your conditional use applications. That we require a sign permit for any new signage that may be proposed. So if they were going to come in and put in some new signage of some sort, a wall sign or something, then it would need a sign permit through.
But the monument sign doesn't, because the monument sign has already got the permit and has already done
Exactly.
that originally. You're
Yep.
just
Yeah.
changing
So
out
I'm
the
not
element of
I'm
it.
not too concerned with it. It's a typical condition that we put in there in case something they would like to put something different.
All right, any other questions?
No.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thanks.
And I would like to say to staff, it would be interesting to find out a little bit more about why we do the conditional use permits that way relative to the suites. Because we have had a few applications, in my time here where, I think of like that soap business that came and they moved different locations. They went from a small facility, then they grew, they went to another facility to get a bigger facility. And that made sense to me. But moving suites or adding additional suites in the same use, same complex doesn't actually make a lot of sense. So I would just encourage staff, if we can kind of find out more about why we're doing that, and maybe if it doesn't make sense, let's change it. So, because we got a year to do it before she's going to come back for her second one to expand. So, just anyway. So,
all right, thank you. Any other discussion? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we approve a conditional use permit to allow Liberal Arts College on the property located at 5286 South Commerce Drive, Suite A136, subject to conditions 1 through 6.
All right, have a motion
Second the motion.
and a second. Any other additional discussion? So Zach or Jared, could you call a roll vote?
Commissioner Woodbury,
Yes.
Commissioner Milkevich,
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson,
Yes.
Commissioner May,
Yes.
Commissioner Martin,
Yes.
and Chair.
Yes. So, thank you, congratulations, and we'll look for your business in the Murray City area.
Look forward
Thank
to
you.
having a football team.
Okay, agenda item number 5. Anahata Reiki Healing Arts requesting approval of a conditional use permit to allow our Reiki business to be located on the property address 111 East, 5600 South, Suite 206. Is the applicant here tonight for that? Good, we'll have you come up in a little bit. And Zach is going to give us staff report for this item.
Perfect. So, like you said, this is a conditional use for a Reiki business. This is located in the Independence Hall office park area, just off of State and 5600 South. The specific unit is in 111 East, which is the far west side of the office park. It is located in the conditional, or I'm sorry, in the commercial CD zone, which would require Reiki to have a conditional use permit. They are located on the second floor, just right up here, right in the middle. It's a small suite, again, 298 square feet. She proposes to operate Tuesday through Saturday, roughly 10 to 7, Tuesday through Friday, and then 10 to 3 on Saturdays. She typically sees about 4 clients a day for about 90 minutes. Here are a few photos of the area. Sorry, I got really artsy on that one on the far right-hand side. I was feeling pretty good about those pictures. And then originally in the packet, I had stated that additional landscaping would be required. However, as I went out there today, I think it would suffice, so that's up to the commission whether you guys want to scratch that condition out of there. So with that, we are recommending approval subject to the 4 conditions, or 3 if you decide to scratch that one out of there. So any questions for me?
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The applicant, come forward, please, and state your name and address for the record.
My name's Tammy College. My address is 5900 South, 1490 East in Salt Lake City.
All right. And have you had an opportunity to review these conditions for approval?
Yes, I have.
And are you able to comply with them?
Yes, I am.
All right. Do you have anything to add to the staff report?
I don't.
All right. Commissioners have any questions?
Pretty straightforward.
All right. Thank you very much. So I will open this item for public comment. Anyone like to comment on this item? Seeing none, I will close public comment and bring it back to the commissioners for discussion or a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that the commission approve a conditional use permit to allow a Reiki business on the property located at 111 East, 5600 South, Suite 206, subject to conditions 1, 2, and 4. I do not see the need for the landscaping condition.
I'll second that.
I have a motion, a second. Is there any additional discussion? All right. Zach, could you do a roll call vote, please?
Yep. Commissioner Markham?
Yes.
Commissioner Hank?
Yes.
Commissioner Davis?
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Yes.
And Commissioner Hacker?
Yes.
Forgot why I was...
All right, motion passes. Congratulations. Thank you for starting business in Murray, and good luck to you. Okay, item number 6, CDI Craig Fisher Painting, requesting approval for a conditional use permit to allow the operation of a painting contractor business on the property located at 4547 South, 250 West. Is the applicant here for that? Okay, great. We'll have you come up. And Jared Hall is going to give us a staff report.
Okay, thank you. So this is the property shown there in the aerial that you can see. The building and the small parking lot in the front take up much of the site. As I mentioned in the staff report, there was a variance granted a number of years ago for the front landscaping that couldn't be put in because of this. Because of the right-of-way that exists right here. You can't really see this right-of-way anymore in real life, but it is still there, serving utilities and providing access to several buildings, including this particular building. It is 2,856 square feet of usable space. It's only a 0.12 acre lot. It was formerly the dog kennel. We went through a conditional use for that a number of years ago as well, so you might remember that. There is an area, as we mentioned in the staff report, most of the interior of the lot or of the property, it's in the MG zone, requires the conditional use permit for the contractor. Most of the building, I'm going to skip ahead to the floor plan here, most of the building is just open space that can be used for storage, staging, that kind of thing. There's a small area where there was a dog wash. It fits perfectly for the cleaning of the equipment for painting. These are all latex-based, water-based paints. No oil-based paints will be used here. If they were to use oil-based paints, it's in your conditions. The fire department and the water department would want to review the plans again, make sure there was an oil interceptor, a grease interceptor applied to the property. It doesn't have that right now, but doesn't need it for the or for the latex-based paints. There is a small office in the front with the restroom and the overhead door here. On the outside, we'll go back to the site plan here for this. On the outside, there is a small area that was fenced in by the previous applicants. That's going to be used. It's an 8-foot vinyl fence. It's going to be used by the current applicant for storage of scaffolding, ladders, that kind of thing. There are 5 striped parking stalls. It's a concrete parking area that was put in by the previous owners. Have a picture of it there. That's that outdoor area that I was mentioning. The parking stalls are all here in the front, including the ADA accessible stall that was put in at that time. We actually are just recommending 3 conditions and approval. that they get a Murray City business license, that they don't use oil paints unless they come back for more review by the fire department and water department, and that we do get any building permits for any work that's done. They are not proposing any construction at this time or any remodeling, but if they were to do any, we'd want to get permits. Any questions for staff? Thanks.
All right, would the applicant come forward, state your name and address for the record?
Thank you. Craig Fisher, CDI Fisher Painting.
Have you had an opportunity to read these conditions for approval?
Yes.
Are you able to comply with them?
Yes.
And do you have any other information for us that you'd like to provide other than the staff report?
No.
All right. Commissioners, do you have any questions?
Just curious about the type of painting that you do, or if you do any actual painting of items on the site, or is it all done off-site, or just a little bit more about the business?
We paint commercial buildings, and that's where our work is. The building will be used for staging projects, storage of equipment, and we'll run our little office out of there as well.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. I will open this item for public comment. Anyone like to comment on this particular agenda item? Seeing none, I'll close public comment and bring it back to the commissioners for a discussion or a motion.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the conditional use permit allowing for the operation of painting contractor business on the property located at 4547 South, 250 West, subject to conditions 1 through 3.
I'll second.
Okay, a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion? Jared, will you call it roll call vote, please?
Yes.
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 Yes. All right, motion passes.
Good luck.
Good luck to you. Thank you for having your business in Murray.
Go paint the town red.
And we'll move to agenda item number 7, Unique Plumbing LLC requesting approval of a conditional use permit to allow the operation of a plumbing contractor business on the property located at 4425 South, 500 West, Suite A and C. Is the applicant here this evening for that? All right, we'll have you up in a little bit. And Jared Hall will give us staff report.
Okay, thank you. So this application is also in the MG zone for a contractor, but a plumbing contractor rather than painting contractor, as you noted. The building, or the units that they'll be occupying, are roughly right here, part of the north building. As you can see, there are kind of 4 identical buildings on 4 separate properties, all linked together by this access through from 5th West to Century Drive, giving them parking and access to their units. So again, it's in the MG zone, requires that conditional use permit. We hadn't been able to show a previous contractor at this location, as was mentioned before, so we're looking for the conditional use on this. There are 8 stalls associated with this particular set of units that can be used. Most of, just like the other application, most of the interior of this space, as you're going to see, is just an open warehouse area. Open space, a couple of small office spaces and restrooms. The rest of it will be used for storage of equipment, staging, and that kind of thing. There isn't any actual work done here. All the work's done off-site. I believe the applicant's narrative that's in your packets talks about how most of the workers take their trucks home. There are a couple of trucks that stay here permanently, and there's one worker in the office, and then owners in and out. Just taking a quick look at the parking situation and to talk about landscaping, I want to talk about those 2 things. So the 2 of the conditions that we're recommending are to do with the parking and with the landscaping. With the parking first, these 8 stalls, this stall they've X'd out on their site plan appropriately. It shouldn't be used as a parking stall. There's an overhead door right there. We don't do parking in front of overhead doors, generally speaking. However, they do need an ADA striped stall, so we've recommended that this particular stall could be used as ADA, and then this area we could use as the accessibility hatched limited area. That way it's not a parking stall. It does kind of good on both sides. It keeps them from having anybody parked in front of their overhead door, and it provides that necessary ADA accessible spot. The landscaping, if you note in your reports, I'm going to go back to the overall aerial here. These are 4 individual properties. So as you're aware, 17.68 of our code requires a certain number of trees and shrubs for every 100 linear feet of frontage. Calculated here, it's less than 100 feet. I think it's 86 feet of frontage. I'm without looking at my notes. We calculated just for this portion here that's directly adjacent to their building, that would require, forgotten my requirement, but I think it's in my conditions, so I'll go to those. That would require the installation of 2 trees, 4 5-gallon shrubs, and 8 1-gallon shrubs to meet the requirements of our ordinance currently. It's well kept, but it's just lawn. Conditional uses when we see those things upgraded, so we are recommending that it, as a condition of approval, they install that additional plant material to meet that code, and then again, that they stripe that ADA stall, and then just get business licenses and take permits out. Again, they're not anticipating making any changes, doing any construction, any remodeling, but if they did, we would want to get permits. Any questions for staff at this point? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Would the applicant please come forward and state your name and address for the record?
Chas Kerouac, 1400 North, Morning Vista Road, Lehigh, Utah, for Unique Plumbing.
All right, and have you had an opportunity to review these conditions?
I have.
And are you able to comply with them?
Yeah.
All right. Do you have any additional information you'd like to share with the commissioners?
The only one that I had is when we talked to the landlord on the ADA stall, if we could do, because we want to switch the one that they striped as an ADA stall, we were trying to get that one to an overhead door, because we have 3 crews that go in and out and just the one access. If we could just move it to that first stall and use that adjacent space as the ADA as well.
So here and then, like that, ADA here and then, oh, sorry.
No, right here. This one or this one. We could do both of them if needed because they're just as temporary parking, so it doesn't matter to us, but we're gonna try to get both overhead doors in there. And so that's the only thing that we had is if we could just stripe those 2 as ADA or one of them, either one, doesn't matter to us. Either one works for us, so.
Okay, we'll have staff address that. Anything else you'd like to
Nope, that's it.
present? All right. Questions for the commissioners? All right, thank you very much.
All right, thanks.
I will open this item for public comment. Seeing none, I will close public comment period and have Jared, you want to address ADA stall?
So I'm not sure about the other overhead door, but let me address it this way. Our only concern as staff is that one of these stalls be converted to an ADA accessible stall without impacting or severely impacting the overall parking on the site. It's not badly parked. We're probably okay to work with them on adjusting where we put that stall. This was just our recommendation because it's usually the easiest. But if they're trying to get use of another overhead door, we can accommodate that as long as it still provides us an ADA stall. That is van accessible. That's the only other trick, is that we need 8 feet of space kind of preserved to the side of it. So if there's another place that we can do that there, I'm not wedded to this one spot. Just
So we understand that is both of the stalls in front of the opening there in the middle would both go away? In which case, do they still meet the parking requirements?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
They actually do have another stall on the side here that they didn't count. There's a stall on the 500 West side that would make up for the deficiency of 2 being lost.
All right.
So
Great.
that would still be all right.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Commissioners, any questions, comments, or entertain a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve a conditional use permit allowing for the operation of a plumbing contractor business on the property located at 4425 South, 500 West, Suite A and C, subject to conditions 1 through 4.
And I'll second that motion.
All right. I have a motion and a second. Are there any other comments, discussion? So Jared?
Mr. Ney.
Yes.
Ms. Milkevich.
Yes.
Ms. Wilson.
Yes.
Mr. Markham.
Yes.
Mr. Woodbury.
Yes.
Yes. All right. Motion passes. Thank you for having your business in Murray, and we'll look forward to seeing you over there.
Good luck.
Agenda item number 8, Shizawa Accessory Dwelling Unit, requesting approval of a conditional use permit to allow an accessory dwelling unit to be located at the property address 100 West Magic Isle Lane. Is the applicant here for that item this afternoon? No? Okay. So Zach is going to give us staff report.
All right, thanks. Thanks for that. So yes, this is a request for an accessory dwelling unit at 100 West Magic Isle Drive. Accessory dwelling units are permitted are allowed to are allowed within the in single-family home zones, subject to a conditional use permit. This is located in the R16 zone, which would allow for it. There we go. Which would allow for an accessory dwelling unit subject to meeting the regulations. This is the site plan they provided. There's a couple sheds on the site. Other than that, it's pretty fairly open. There is a garage. There is a 2-car garage here, and then also quite a bit of driveway space for off-street for the additional 2 spaces of off-street parking. This is just kind of a general floor plan that they got off the assessor's website. This is where it's more informative. This is the ADU, the actual ADU laid out. It's proposed at 489 square feet, which is about 29% of the total, that they have of 1,700 square feet for the main dwelling, which does come in at that less than 40% that we require. The main concern here, and I'm actually going to go all out and use this new Apple Pencil that we have for this thing. One of the main concerns we had, that the building official had, is that they do not allow for exiting into a garage. There are fire issues there. So the applicant has actually come in, and you'll have to forgive my terrible drawing, but they've come in and would like to close that off with a hallway there. There is an existing back door here that leads to the backyard, and then they would also install a door to the garage. After discussing that with Steve Reed, our building official, he said that would be adequate as long as it meets the fire separation when they build the hallway. So they don't see a great concern there, but it would need to be built prior to the issuance of a business license. So here is a couple photos. They just recently closed, so I was able to pull all these off of Zillow, which was kind of nice. So this is the existing, and I should caveat that this all existed prior. Again, this is one of those ones where it's coming into conformance. This had already existed, and without building permits, without anything like that. So this is actually going through the process and becoming legal at this point. So this is what is existing right here. It's just it's just a stovetop. It's not a full stove. They would like to put in a full stove at some point. And again, this is kind of the living area. This is the main, dwelling with steps down to the ADU as well. This is actually the laundry facilities and the entrance to the ADU. This is, as you can see, the bathroom and the bedroom area. And then this is that back door that I had mentioned previously. And Steve, the building official, is good with this type of door. I think they might want to upgrade that door. It's not a requirement, but that's something they might want to look into. So with that, we are recommending approval subject to the 13 conditions outlined below. Any questions for me?
Zach, I assume that the applicant has reviewed these conditions?
I hope so.
Because they're not here, right?
They are not here. I've had conversations with them on and off throughout this week and last week. He is aware that there was a planning commission meeting tonight.
I mean, the reason I bring it up, I mean, I know that they're subject to these, if it's approved, and they wouldn't get any permit unless they checked all the boxes on these. But I always get a little nervous when they don't come and have the chance to stand in front of us and say, yes, I will comply for the public record, and especially if people are here to speak to that. It always makes me a little nervous about doing it because...
And I definitely understand that, and it is completely within your authority to to table this item, and that way I could reach out to them and tell them that the planning commission really wanted you to see this.
We'll see how the whole commission feels, and I just think with 13 conditions, and we know that the accessory dwelling units traditionally are not like approving a plumbing business or a previous one that we've done with little discussion. So I'd just be curious. We'll see if
Sure.
there's public comments and discussion here. But these are things that require a lot more commitment to following them because it's hard to enforce.
I agree.
So,
And just for the sake of clarity, and I know we see these conditions all the time.
Mm-hmm.
However, if there are people here tonight that are interested in this item, I would appreciate for their benefit if maybe you could just go through these conditions to,
Sure.
It may answer some questions that people have prior to coming up and talking about certain items, because there are some specific things here that I don't think everyone is aware of that he will be required if it is approved.
Sure. Yeah, and that's one of like some of those conditions, and some. You're right. I've kind of glossed over some of these in the past, so I apologize.
No, it's fine. When the applicant's here, that's entirely appropriate. He's not here, and I
Sure.
want to have as much.
Of course. Yeah. So
possible.
some of the things that they do require, for example, on the building side, they require interconnected smoke alarms throughout both the ADU and the main dwelling. It does need to meet all building and fire code standards. So that actually would go through the business licensing aspect. Those would get checked off during that portion of it. They would be required to have a business license if they were going to rent this out. Typically what we see is that they do rent these out, but for long-term stays, because as we number 13 states, temporary rentals are not allowed in these ADUs, such as Airbnbs, VRBOs, those things like that. So we do require rental business license so that they have that going forward. That also gives us an opportunity to keep a little bit more track of these as well. The owner is also required to record an affidavit with the county stating that there is an ADU on the property, and if property ownership should change, then they will either have to come back before us or at least meet the same conditions as the conditional use permit. There are occupancy requirements. So typically in a single-family residence, you are allowed 4 unrelated adults. However, when you do an ADU, the ADU is limited to 2 unrelated adults and their children, be it by blood or marriage or adoption or whatever. And then I think I've already kind of mentioned this, but inspections, specifically by the building division, fire usually goes out as well, will be addressed during business licensing. Let's see.
I
Parking.
think.
Yeah.
Parking is
Parking.
Oh, parking, yes. So our typical parking requirements are 2 off-street parking spaces per single-family residence. In ADUs, we require an additional 2 off-street parking spaces. So that would go back to this space here. So we would incorporate the garage as 2 spaces, and then we anticipate this could hold more than 2 spaces as well. And then, let's see.
Zach, don't we often have the parking as a condition? Did I miss it in here?
Normally.
Just standard.
I think it's normally in there, but I don't see it in these conditions.
I don't think it hasn't been in the past.
Is it not a
at least
condition? It's just the assumption?
No, it's been
just
in
a
a lot of them.
It's part of the requirements. It would fall under condition number 9, that should comply with all applicable ordinance standards outlined in
fair enough.
1778, because that does require that there.
Yeah.
Egress windows also.
That's why I bring it up.
There are some,
A lot of these fall under.
again, that will be addressed by the building department for any fire escape egress windows, especially in these basement units. We like to make sure that people can get out. So
Okay.
I
Thank
think
you.
I
I
covered.
think you hit all the highlights I was concerned about, so hopefully
Perfect.
that answered some questions. Thank
Sure,
you.
no problem.
All right, thank you very
Thanks.
much. All right, applicant isn't here, so we won't hear from them. I will open this meeting agenda item up for public comment. Are there any public comments? Come up, please. Please state your name and your address for the record.
Hi, my name is Jeff Bogard. I live at 5630 South Magic Drive in this same subdivision. I was I wanted to find out a little bit more about the fact that this was going to be used as a rental. In the information we got, it's like, okay, this door is going to be locked, so it's obviously not like mother-in-law apartment that's living there. This is something we're going to lock that. Access is from somewhere else. So that concerns me a little. One of my other concerns is that property has a kind of a wedge shape to it, and the parking would make it a little difficult. The street parking too, because that's on a circle, there is really no street parking. I know you're requiring off-street parking, but the fact is that if they're on the street, there's not much there. So those are really my concerns that I have.
All right, thank you
Thank you.
very much. Anyone else like to comment regarding this item? All right, I'll close public comment and ask Zach, could you address those two questions? Parking and operating as a rental property?
Yep. So definitely those parking, we do take that into concern. As I stated a little bit earlier, we do make sure that there is enough parking there to fit at least 2 additional off-street parking stalls, with inclusion of the garage that would have 2 as well. With the rental, from all I know, all I have been presented with is that they plan to rent it to family. I can't guarantee that though, and the control we have here is that the conditional use permit specifically states that it can't be short-term rentals. It has to be a minimum of 30 days. So that's kind of all I've got on that one.
Quick question, does the main part of the dwelling have to be owner occupied?
Yes, it does. Thank you for reminding me of that. Let me rephrase. The owner has to reside on property. So regardless, they can live in the ADU side and rent the main dwelling side, or they can live in the main dwelling and rent out the ADU.
But they have to be on premises.
They have to live on at this property. That is correct. Yes, thank you for clarifying that. That's a big one.
And the occupancy rules wouldn't change if they lived in the ADU?
That's correct.
Okay, all of that stays the same.
Yep.
Thank you.
Any other comments for?
I mean, it's just kind of the same concern I expressed before. These are always kind of sticky issues, to protect the neighborhoods and the quality that we try to represent here in Murray, and not having the applicant here to say yes, I will live in the home, and yes, I understand the conditions, and I guess it just always makes me a little nervous about it. And so, I mean, Zach or Jared, I mean, is this something that they? I mean, I know they have to comply with all of them. I know they have to comply in order to do it, but I just hate the idea of 13 conditions on here, and actually parking. Travis and I were talking about. I swear that parking is usually included, but it's not on here.
It feels like we normally have 13 conditions, and they have an additional condition for the egress and the wall being redone. So
right. So having them understand parking, because they may look at these 13 and say, I'm in compliance, and parking's not on here, and so then they don't agree to it. And Jared, do we know, or Zach, do we know how many of these are currently in compliance as far as some of these, or do they have to do the work on all of them? Do we know?
On the conditions,
Yeah.
I would let Zach probably speak to that.
Well, it is his item, but you stood up and looked so
Well,
good.
just because.
So,
I never like to jump in, and Zach does great. But I just, talking about it, I wanted to make one quick point, and then I'll let Zach address whether some of these need to be dealt with by building permits. I think a couple of them do, actually. I don't know about
Okay.
egress windows, but the baseboard heaters, that kind of thing. All of those conditions, those 13 conditions, and I think sometimes we have parking on there specifically, and sometimes we don't, especially when they have to provide extra parking, like they have to pour an expanded pad
Right,
or something,
right.
then it's always on. Other times, we may have not included it in those 13 because it's a set deal. Another point to make, the gentleman asked about on-street parking. People are allowed to park on public streets unless they're residents of an ADU. Then they've signed up to say, I won't park on the street, and that's in the information that we always give to the applicants, and they know that. It's one of our rules that we don't really pound that one a lot when we talk about it in the public hearings, but they don't park on the public street. They're not supposed to. And we have a couple of ADUs where that's become a concern, where it was a concern in the public hearings, and you guys probably remember that. And so I wanted to make sure I took the moment. This is why I jumped up, really. We've had lots of complaints about renters in basements. We've had lots of complaints about multiple families living in homes. The only times we don't have complaints about those things are when there are ADUs in place that have gone through the process and agreed to these terms, and they're all on notice with their conditional use permits. I do code enforcement through our division in planning and zoning as well, and we do not have a single one that I can think of, once they've gone through the ADU process, complained about. Not even with the parking on the street or loud hours or whatever else. All those rules are designed to make it so that there's no reason you would know that there are two families living in that home, that there are no more than two adults that are unrelated, et cetera. So for example, in a single family home in whatever neighborhood, 4 college kids could get together and rent that home and live in it. But they couldn't do that in an ADU. Only 2 of them could live there because there's only 2 bedrooms. So you can't pack them full of college kids, et cetera. They're all designed to keep those things from happening. And we haven't had complaints once we started using the ADU rules. So just to your point.
well, and that's, go ahead, Lisa.
I just wanted, just for the record, to say I have some of the same concerns that Scott has about the applicant not being here, and I would love some more discussion, see what everyone else is thinking, because I'd like discussion around, is there any harm in postponing this to a point where the applicant can come, or are they depending on the income from this ADU, and we will be exposing them to financial hardships? Because
I couldn't tell you.
because we could say number 8 has us covered because the inspector will check all these things and they will occur, but
That's, I guess, the way that I would answer that, and I'll let Zach come back up about it. But there are, when you all finish entitling an accessory dwelling unit and grant a conditional use permit, they're like 40% of the way there. There are building permits that have to be done. A business license has to be issued. We require, and Zach's done a great handout that we give to everybody about these things they have to do. So we needed them to have kind of a flow chart, a checklist of things they need to do once and you're like halfway down the list. Get your conditional use permit and then fill all the conditions. And that means we require an inspection, even if they're not remodeling anything. You mentioned if there's work that has to be done to meet these conditions, even if they're not remodeling anything. The inspectors go out for the business license and check all those things to make sure they meet them, egress windows and baseboard heaters and dual zone furnaces or whatever it is, and check the parking and all those things. So regardless, we have kind of fail-safes in place after. I couldn't tell you if there's any harm to the applicants in waiting 2 more weeks to come back again if you postpone it to the next meeting. Zach might know better than me if they're on a timetable or anything. I just don't know.
I mean, Jared and Lisa, thank you for your thoughts on that as well. It seems to me like you're actually just illustrating the reason why we need the applicant here. Because you're saying once we do these, we know there's a ton of rentals in this city that are not following these. And those are the ones that are causing the problems. And then when we have an ADU and they come through the process and they stand in front of, their neighbors, they say on the record, and the 3 or 4, well, Susan's watching, so maybe 7 people watching online, we know that there's more of skin in the game. I'm going to abide by these because I just said I'm going to. And so I just get bothered by the fact that they're not here. The neighbors here express concerns. It's just, do we know why the applicant didn't come? Was there any, okay. Especially living there and things like that. And obviously things come up, but I've said enough on it.
I hate to do something that feels like a reprimand if someone has an issue. They have a flat tire, it's a child, some reason they can't be here, but if they can, I'd prefer them to be here as well.
Zach, can I ask you, this did not come forward on enforcement. This came forward proactively by the applicant.
That's correct.
That makes me feel better about them not being here because they without being called to the carpet, they chose proactively to come forward with the application. That's the only difference.
No, I mean, you're right, but how many of our ADUs are, okay, we're in trouble, we're slapping your hand, come make it official, versus people who buy a home and then go through the process and try to do it right? Do you know?
I don't.
And for ones that are ADUs as a result of...
I'll take an advocate position for the staff here. I think that there are enough safety checks, and the system has been laid out that Jared explained. The way they go through this and where we are on the flow chart, and there's still a lot more stuff, roughly halfway there, that they're going to have signed off by building permits and inspections, multiple inspections, and so forth. I think there's enough checks and balances in place that we can go ahead with this. But the applicant, he's making it tougher on himself by not being here, because if something does come up and he's not willing to do it or able to do it, he's not going to get his application, and he's going to be further down the road, and it's going to be much more difficult on him to endure that.
Well, and for sake of conversation, I obviously would prefer for him to be here, but I don't think it's required. Right? So we can't reprimand somebody for doing something that wasn't required, not doing something that wasn't required.
And we've said our piece on the record, and it'll be there. And to Commissioner Markham's point, if something comes up and there's issues here, or he comes back and says, I didn't know about that, we can say, well, this is why we had it. So I agree. I mean, I don't ever want the staff to feel like that, it's like we're the all-powerful authority and nothing happens without us. We know our place. We know that there's a lot of things that have to be done, and there's a lot of checks and balances on the city. So thank you for saying that, Mr. Markham. Appreciate that.
I did want to go just real quickly just to address. I think it was either Scott or Travis. I don't remember which one.
Or both, because we're ganging up on you.
Yeah, pretty much. You guys are. I'm so mean. Regarding what they've gotten done so far, I can't speak to that. They have most of it done. That creating that wall and that hallway, they have not submitted a building permit for that. That can take up to, 2 weeks, about 2 weeks for them to even get a building permit for that. So they have to wait that long for that. There's some internal discussion between myself and the building department regarding the windows. They're just slightly shy of egress. They meet the height and the depth, but the open area, I don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense to me. But the open area is just slightly off. It's 5.25 square feet of open area is what they have. They need 5.75 square feet. So it's a window. So we're having an internal discussion. It is up to Steve Reed. He can make allowances there. So we haven't come to that conclusion yet. So there is still some things they have to figure out. We don't typically allow them to apply for a business license until after this process is done. So there's at least another 3 weeks into that. So there's quite a bit of time left that they have to do before they are even able to rent this out to anybody.
It's feeling Thanksgiving-ish.
Ish.
All right.
So is that point to saying it wouldn't hinder the process to delay it for 2 weeks, or is that point just saying...
It's saying there's enough stuff that they still have to do that it's really not going to make a big difference, so you might as well do it today.
There's going to be a lot of
That's not what I
conversations with the
didn't say that.
applicant.
Yeah.
No, you
didn't say
did.
that.
No, you did.
So
it's entirely up to you guys. If you guys feel like you'd like to see him here, he has in the past seemed like a very reliable person. When I brought up this hallway issue before, he was quick to reach out and try to get it resolved. If I'm going to speak to his character at all, he was at the planning review meeting, so I have a feeling this must have just slipped his mind or something. I don't know.
Okay.
So I
That
won't
hurts
make
my
ex-
ego.
Thank you, Zach.
Good.
You're not
It
that
needs.
important.
But there's
We know
follow-up
our
after
place.
this,
Oh,
even
there's
if
much.
we
In the
There's
if
lots
we
of follow-up.
go ahead and approve it, it's not just going to fall in a crack. There'll still be people calling and saying, these are the conditions.
Yep, Susan will be sending out. So
Right.
as soon as this is done, Susan sends out the conditional use permit, the official document. She'll send that out, and then when you guys approve the minutes and the findings of fact, she sends those out. So they get inundated with mail.
Okay.
So they will get that and know. They do, like I said, get the minutes. They get a copy of the minutes stating what you guys have said. So they'll know if you guys do decide to approve it tonight. They'll know that what was said in the meeting as well.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
All right, excellent
Makes sense.
comments and concerns all around. So with that, I will entertain a motion on this agenda item.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion that the Planning Commission approve a conditional use permit to allow an accessory dwelling unit at the property addressed 100 West Magic Isle Lane, subject to conditions 1 through 13.
I'd like to second that motion.
A motion and a second. Is there any additional discussion?
No.
All right, Jared, would you call roll call vote?
Zach.
You couldn't remember my name, so I'm going to Jared.
Hair Hacker.
Yes.
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 Yes. So, well, neighbors, you heard some of our comments. So there's concern. However, there's also significant checks and balances from the city, the building inspectors and so on, and some pretty serious work that the property owner will have to do before any dwelling unit actually gets occupied. So, but we definitely respect your concerns for this item. Thank you for coming.
And you know the rules now. So
Yes.
that's important.
All right, our last agenda item for this evening is the Murray City Community and Economic Development Department proposing amendments to the Murray City Code, specifically Section 17.146 of the Land Use Ordinance, which is the mixed-use zone.
Okay, thank you. So we went over this a little bit in the pre-meeting, but I'll go through the slides that I hope will explain kind of what we're suggesting here as staff. And then as a preemptive statement, this is a step we feel like we needed to take, but it's probably the first of making other refinements as we go through looking at mixed use in the city sort of growing up a little bit and being more broadly applied. We hope that's maybe the case. So with that in mind, let me show you what we've proposed so far. The mixed use zones, and I'll just for the public record, I'll go over a couple of things that are sort of common knowledge for you all. We have 3 zones in the city that are considered mixed use zones, and a mixed use zone is any zone in which in the same building or on the same property you can have both commercial and residential uses. We have 3 of those zones: the MCCD, downtown zone, the TOD, transit oriented development zone, and then one that we confusingly just call the mixed use zone, even though it's just one of 3 different mixed-use zones. That's the one that we're talking about tonight, Section 17.146. And the first thing, we're proposing several changes to kind of try to accommodate the difficulties that we have been hearing about for several years and that we've encountered in a couple of projects that we've processed, and in anticipating a future where it's not confined to a certain area of the city right around the tracks station. So we had to, in order to do that, we add 3 definitions. The first one being transit station. That refers to any one of 3 transit stations that are in the city: Fashion Place West, Murray Central, and the Murray North, which is more commonly known as Fireclay. So we added transit station as a definition, and the second definition we added was horizontal mixed use. We've talked about a couple of times, but I'll just go over it real quickly here: horizontal mixed uses and vertical mixed uses. The pictures here are of horizontal mixed uses. This is actually in San Diego. So what it's depicting is a horizontal mixed use is a property where any component of that property is a separate building that is commercial and buildings that are residential. Now maybe those residential buildings have commercial components like are kind of shown here, and that's roughly corresponding to these units here. There are some ground floor commercial units and residences above, but behind those units, there are just all residential all the way down. So those are solid residential buildings. So we call it horizontal mixed use. You have commercial components here. They're all on the same properties or in the same project, but they're different kinds of uses. So, and they're arranged horizontally. It's pretty basic, right? And our definition is a mixed-use project in which all or some of the commercial and residential components are provided in separate buildings on the same parcel or on contiguous parcels that are included together in a master site plan. Moving on to vertical mixed use, obviously the vertical mixed use then is a project where commercial components are provided within the same building with the residential components. So here's kind of a classic ground floor commercial with residential units above. Vertical mixed use. We felt like it was necessary if we're going to do this properly to define the two kinds of mixed uses that are potentially projects. The next thing that we did was add a density gradient. Right now, multiple family uses, multifamily apartments and condos are allowed without any density limits. That's a response to the mixed use zone being basically applied only in one area of the city, right in here, right near the Murray Central Station, our largest transit station. With no density limits, the Planning Commission recently recommended approving a zone change in this area, outside of 1 mile of the transit station. Without that easy access to public transit, it's harder to justify those kinds of levels of density, unlimited densities that could occur, without that being a serious impact to community or to traffic, parking situations, that kind of thing. So we have recommended a gradient that basically says within 1/4 of a mile of a transit station, that's why we define transit stations, you can do up to 100 units per acre. We didn't leave it unlimited. The capital improvements in the city have been planned over the next decade or so to be increased to allow up to accommodate about 100 units per acre in the areas around the transit stations. So that's kind of, you're not going to see much more than that in Utah anyway, 100 units per acre. We've done, the most dense projects we've done so far have been 70 to 80 units per acre at Murray North, Metro Fire Clay, and then at Murray Crossing. So we feel confident that the 100 units per acre is not going to keep anyone from building, and it's not going to cause problems either if we get in that range. That's in 1/4 mile. You can see the 3 different stations: Fashion Place West, Murray Central, Murray North. Half a mile, that drops down to 80 units per acre. Within 1 mile, it drops to 50 units per acre maximum, and then outside of 1 mile, if it's a mixed-use project, up to 40 units per acre. Most residential multifamily apartment complexes are 20 to 25 units per acre, so you can imagine what the density would be. In a mixed-use project, we allow more density because it is a mixed-use project, and ostensibly the people that are living in there have access to services that otherwise they'd get in their car to use, even though they are maybe isolated in an area like this Kmart site from other transit options. They still have some other shopping options on site. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? And we can come back to any of these as we go. I figured I'd go through the slides and then let you guys barrage me with questions. Does that seem fair? Okay. This is just a close-up to show you, kind of give you a better idea of that area that would be in that 1/4 mile. So this is the transit station at Murray Central. My finger's not working, Zach. There we go. That's the transit station at Murray Central. Right here is the Murray Crossing development that you probably have all seen. That's within that 100 units per acre. It's actually about 72 units per acre. We have a raging debate, 72 units per acre, 65 units per acre, depends on how you calculate it, but I say 72. In this same area, most of it's within the transit station or up to the IHC hospital there. In the half mile, you get more of like the Bonneview site down Commerce Drive and some of those other areas where we might see up to 80 units the acre, but more common, the developable parcels are going to be in this other area, outside of that, in that 1 mile area, so 50 units per acre. And the mixed-use zone is only really applied right now. Let's see, I'm looking at 48 right there. So mixed use is really, the zoning itself is applied mainly right here, and then the AISU school. So this area, a lot of it, this would be in the 50 units per acre zone, and this would be in the 80 units per acre zone, most of the developable land. So we just wanted to include that slide to give you kind of an idea of what areas we're talking about.
So Jared, just for clarification,
Yeah.
what we're talking about only applies to an area that's zoned MU.
Yes.
So
It would only apply to the MU zoning. It doesn't matter, if you're outside of the MU zone, if you're in the CD zone, so like up here on State Street or something,
Right.
you're still limited to your CD zoning, what it allows. It doesn't allow residential uses right now. You'd have to get rezoned to mixed use to
I
have
just
this
asked
apply.
that because the last map you showed me, it looked like a third of Murray is in question here, and it's really
Right.
not. It's those areas that also
Right.
include it.
Wherever mixed-use zoning falls within those areas, those the densities apply. There's not actually a lot of mixed-use zoning in those areas. And the TOD zone, for example, that's up here is a mixed-use zone, but it is not the mixed-use zone. So those density gradients don't apply to the Fire Clay area right now. If we were to rezone land in that area to mixed use, then they would. Let's say that the Desert Industries building went away and the church was redeveloping it as a mixed-use site, those density gradients would apply. Again, I don't know that that would happen. I'm just saying you're exactly right. These radiuses only count for mixed-use zoning, and it's right now only right there.
And our discussion today about the mixed-use zoning and the definitions of parts of it wouldn't affect what we are going to currently label or rezone as mixed use. We're
That's
just
right.
talking about the
It
definition.
doesn't treat that at all. We're only talking about the area that's zoned right now.
Okay.
That's a good point. Thank you, Commissioner. Another thing to talk about just with vertical mixed use, we wanted to talk about the way we require commercial components. So a mixed use project a mixed use zone is not a multifamily high density zone. It is a mixed use zone and it requires both components. There's concerns sometimes that the money to be made in multifamily development will means that you zone an area mixed use and you're really just zoning it high density residential. That's not the case. So we have requirements for commercial components in every project. In vertical, and we didn't really change these too much, but we wanted to go over those. In vertical mixed use that's within 1/2 mile of the transit station, we're recommending that commercial development has to occupy 75% of the ground floor of residential buildings that face public streets. That is not the language right now. I think we went over that before. It's 75% of the ground, the footprint of any residential building has to be commercial. That doesn't work for rear portions. For example, this kind of parking behind these would not be allowed. We have to provide that space somewhere else because we're underneath the building here. So that allows us to do this kind of tuck under parking to the rear of the building or use the balance of, we're recommending 40 feet of the building frontage that faces the public street be developed commercially, 75% of that.
And the old wording compared to this wording is a little bit restrictive on builders because it might be hard to get commercial businesses on this side.
With deeper buildings and deeper sites, really hard to provide that 75% of all of the ground floors in commercial. So that's been a real challenge and and that inhibits the potential redevelopment that we really need. So, and it's not very common either. I haven't been able to find another code that requires the entire ground floor or 75% of the ground floor to be all developed commercially in a mixed-use project. It just isn't out there, just us. So we are recommending that change. That lets you still have commercial along the street frontages here, but that area behind that can get used, the balance of that building can get used for parking. That's important on a small project like this especially, really. In larger projects, you have an ability to maybe absorb some of that. And on a small project, it's really critical. So then we never get the kind of infill development we really want to see. Horizontal mixed use, we're recommending that the commercial component that gets required. You remember this is maybe provided separately or at least in part by separate buildings. We would require them to build an area, a commercial area square footage that's equal to an area that's 75% of the frontage measured 40 feet deep. So for example, this is the Siegel Lilly School property on 4800 South.
Beautiful parking lot.
Yeah.
It really is.
Move along, please, move along.
It's in the mixed-use zone. So it could be redeveloped as a mixed-use project. If it were to be redeveloped as a mixed-use project that's vertical mixed-use, it would be pretty simple. They would just put ground floor commercial 75% along a building right here. It's not a terribly deep property, so that's probably more likely an L-shaped multi-unit building with some ground floor commercial. If it were horizontal, we would require, it's a 1.44 acre site, it's got 290 feet of frontage, that would, 75% at 40 feet is about 8,700 feet of commercial space required. So that's a lot for a little project like this. So they would be more likely to choose that vertical option. However, this is the old fish food factory. So this is, the name always, Granton Square. It's Hamlet Homes. It's currently under development. It was developed as a horizontal mixed-use project before we had the definition, and we were just relying on the way you would calculate it. And we said 75% of the footprint of all of your buildings that are residential, we need to provide that in a commercial building. And it worked out here. Just over 30,000 square feet of commercial. Under this rule, it would have been less than half of that. 10,860 would have done it because of the depth of this property versus that frontage there. So it makes it more likely this would happen. I will tell you this. Mike Brodsky, Hamlet Homes, that developed this site for mixed use, was the third or fourth person group that looked at this site for redevelopment and mixed use. He's the only one that took it because he could make it work because he already wanted to build an office building for himself in Murray City. So it worked. It wouldn't work again. So just so you know. That 10,800 though might make it possible that we'd see that infill development. So if that makes sense, I'll move on to the next slides. I know you're all eager to see the next slide. I can see it in your faces. So here we go. The next thing that's required, I'm going to go back to horizontal mixed use for a second. When there are multiple properties involved or sites that are larger than 5 acres, we would like to implement a master site plan requirement. We've not had that in the past. But on larger sites, and especially with horizontal mixed use sites, it makes sense to have this component that allows us to control certain aspects of the site and make sure that things are done. So there are 4 components to it. Building orientation, open spaces, a central feature, and memorandums of understanding. So I'm going to start with building orientation. All buildings need to be oriented to the street. We had an initial statement that said main buildings need to be oriented or face public streets. That never makes sense. What's the main building? How do you decide what the main building is? What if you have 6 buildings? None of the others have to orient to the street. We wanted to go more simply and say that there's a general requirement that wherever it's possible, we try to orient buildings to streets. And we have requirements that 50% of the frontage of a project has to be, 50% of the buildings on the front of a building on a project has to be within a certain distance of the street for setback. So it's already kind of there. So we struck that statement that confused everyone and added some more language to the master site plan requirements. So building orientations, they need to face streets. This is just an example from, I think it's in Boulder, Colorado. You can see, and we can talk about other aspects of this too. This is the street frontage. You have some on-street parking. You have the building setbacks. And wherever there's a larger building setback allowed, or that 50%, it's plaza space. It's not parking. We didn't remove the requirement that parking is not allowed between buildings and streets in the mixed-use zone. If you have space, additional space there, it's to the side. If you have parking, it's to the side of the building, and it's not closer to the street than the building is. It's always got to be subordinate. The other aspect would be a central feature, something that kind of ties the project together. We felt like this was important, especially in horizontal mixed-use projects and the bigger projects, 5-acre sites, because those residential components, we don't want it to feel like, and I abstained from putting in pictures of all the developments that I've seen that are sort of mixed-use that don't really do this well, that I hate. So to not be negative, I just want to talk about what we want to see. There needs to be consideration given to how that residential component is related to by the commercial component. So it's not just turned its back to it and the dumpsters are facing the apartment buildings and they have nothing to do with each other. That's not really a mixed-use site. And we don't get any of the benefits of traffic reductions or community life or anything. So we want to make sure that that master site plan forces the developers to look at how those buildings are related and provide ways for them to interact. And that speaks to the next component, which is outdoor spaces. This is just a shot from Gateway in Salt Lake City, where they've done a great job of relating the spaces to each other. All of your commercial components are over here. There are residential components above as well also, but the linkages are great in Gateway. Not to take away from City Creek or whatever, if that's your bag, but the Gateway does a really good job of linking the residential to the commercial and relating to each other and providing outdoor spaces that make it easier to do that. It's more likely if you live in these areas that you're going to cross that area to get to the commercial than otherwise, if it were just a busy street with no sort of enticing features there. So those are those 3 components. We also require that memorandum of understanding. So think of that as a development agreement, that the city has to reach an agreement with that developer in a horizontal mixed-use project that's going to have multiple parcels or is really large, so that we're assured that we get those commercial components that make it a true project as opposed to just getting the 400 apartments and never seeing the rest of it happen. We need that memorandum of understanding, and that's what it needs to control. Parking, the other issue that we spoke about briefly in the first meeting, in the pre-meeting. So we didn't make a lot of changes to parking. However, 1 space to 265 square feet of usable office or retail space or undefined space is a little bit more, or I'm sorry, is a little bit less than 3 per 1,000. So we reduced that just a little bit and called it 3 per 1,000 and combined them all together. That's kind of an industry standard. 3 per 1,000 is a typical parking ratio that you see, and it makes sense for developers. They know how to, it frankly just makes it easier for them to run their numbers when it's a number like 3 per 1,000, and it works out to be just about the same. Additionally, when you provide more parking, then the minimums are required. We don't really have a maximum parking allowance like we do in the MCCD. You remember in the MCCD zone, the downtown, you can only build so much parking. We don't allow you to build any more. In the MU, we don't have that, except for that if you go above 110% right now of the minimums of parking, you're required to put that. You can do it, but you have to do it in structures or within the walls of the building. So you have to put it underneath your building, you have to put it behind your, or in a structure. And that's doable for a large project, probably. It's tougher for small projects. So I ran a couple of numbers just to give you an idea. So we're recommending upping that 110% to 125%. It's not a huge increase, but it might make the difference on a small project. So for example, if you had say you had a small horizontal mixed-use project, and I'm not going to draw on the thing because I'm just not going to do it, but say you had a small horizontal mixed-use project and it was 65 units and 5,400 square feet of retail space or office space. Those 65 units are required at 1.125. That's 73 stalls. That's 73 stalls. 110% of that is 80. So you could go up to 80 without, currently, you could do 7 additional stalls without having to put them in a structure. At 25%, at 125%, you could do 91 stalls, so 11 additional stalls. If that's going to make the difference between the project happening or not happening, I don't feel like it's a huge difference, so we've recommended that. Additionally, so the 5,400 square feet of retail, that would equate to about 16.2 parking stalls required. That's the minimum. If you want to go additional to that, if you want to go more than that, 110 gets you 18, 125 gets you 20. And it's more for the retail component than for the it's more for the retail component than it is for the residential. The retail component, a lot of small restaurants or something like that with a 4,000 square foot footprint, they're going to want that 20 stalls. They're going to want something like that. And if they have to do a structured parking to do that, that may mean the difference between a project or not. So we just want to increase it a little bit to give them a little bit more flexibility in the parking, especially where we're considering a broader application of that zoning and horizontal mixed-use projects as opposed to vertical. In a horizontal mixed-use project, you're going to have standalone restaurants or small C-stores, that kind of thing, and they're going to need a little bit more parking because they are going to have that vehicle component too on 9th East, for example, not to use that as an example all the time, but that's going to be a component there. Go ahead.
So I'm assuming, because I have never done this before, so it's all new to me, but I'm assuming since you do this all the time, the numbers you're calculating in your head include the parking requirements for the restaurant there, because then they'll come to us for conditional permit and we'll require so much parking, and that's all included.
And the parking for the mixed use is really easy to do because it's all the same. It's 3 per 1,000 or 1 to 265 as the case may be. So that's the change we recommended to parking. We can come back to that too, unless there's any questions right now you want to get out of the way. No, we'll come back. No? So want to talk about building setbacks. And we didn't make a whole lot of changes to this, but it was important to kind of to note a couple of things. We measure setbacks in the mixed-use zone, in all 3 of them actually. We don't measure setbacks from property lines. We measure them from the back of the curb and gutter. So there's an area that's in the public right-of-way, the sidewalk and park strip, or the really large sidewalk, that is not really part of the private setback, and we measure it different in this zone than we do in any other zone. It's always confusing to people, and we thought we'd take a moment to add a graphic to this, add an illustration to this zone that would help people understand that as they're reading it and as developers are looking at it. And Zach was gracious enough to get started on that, and we've got that right here. So I'm going to come back to this. Oh, I'll just use this to illustrate it. So what this is showing you is that our setbacks, I'm going to read them real quickly. Buildings facing public streets or private streets, excepting courtyards and plazas where we allow a little greater, have a setback that shall be between 15 and 25 feet from the back of the curb and gutter. So it's not a 15 or 25 foot setback from the property line. That would be kind of normal. 20 feet is the kind of the normal commercial suburban setback. It is rather 25 feet from this curb and gutter that's the edge of kind of the street that people generally identify as the edge of the street. So your sidewalk area, your tree wells and your kind of loading and unloading space from on-street parking is in this area, and then a nice broad 7 or 8 foot sidewalk area here, and then you could start your building right there. This is the potential building setback shown in the hatched area. So this is between 15 and 25 feet from the back of the curb and gutter. We could go all the way to just measuring it from property lines, but we've written it this way in the past, and I didn't want to step on that, so I've just tried to outline it and make it a little more readable and understandable. In the MU zone, you can do something like Zach's illustrated here, where you have the whole area as sort of paving with some tree wells and grates, or you can do that whole area as an 8-foot park strip and a 7-foot sidewalk. The trick is it's a 15-foot pedestrian and furnishing zone from the back of the curb and gutter to the closest point of the building. Now, you don't have to locate your building right there. You have some additional space you can use if you have a reason to. If you have outdoor dining, if you have entrances that have to go up or down to meet ADA requirements, et cetera, then you can utilize this space in design, but we leave that up to you. So that's part of the design. The reason we do that, and one of the other changes we made, is that when you do go to 0 on that setback line, if you're going to do that, then your buildings need to use recessed entrances or some other method of dealing with that. Because at 7 feet right here, if we do sometimes allow parking in this 8 feet right here, off street when there's not enough width in the right of way in the lanes, we'll allow people to, with intermittent landscaping, park in this area. And if you park in this area and have only that 7 feet and your building entrances, we got car doors and building doors swinging into that sidewalk. So we want them to use recessed entrances, and they look nice too. We have that issue at Murray Crossing, and it came up as we designed. So it's not really a flaw in the ordinance per se, except we didn't look at it in terms of design well enough, and that issue we want to address with the ordinance now. So recessed entrances, if you're setting your building at 0, you can set it further back to accommodate different things, but never more than 25 feet from that curb and gutter. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so just an example to show you a couple of sidewalks. This is actually in fire clay, but it's developed with the same kind of right-of-way access standards on the left there. So you have the parking and things, and they can get out of the car and get into the building. You have the tree wells, et cetera, bike racks. And the buildings, even though these are residential buildings, are close to the street, within that 10 to 25-foot setback from the curb and gutter. Here you have that same kind of deal. This is about 10 feet from the street, so it's about what we would require as a minimum from the curb and gutter, a little bit less. But you have this what's called an arcade entrance. So that would be allowed under our code as well. Couple of examples of the other kinds of setbacks I mentioned you could do on this graph. You can do a traditional sort of wide park strip and wide sidewalk. 2 developments that we've had in the mixed use zone so far in the city have opted to do that. This is the EMI building. On the right here, they did the 8-foot and 7-foot park strip and sidewalk in front of their building. And this is the school district on the other side of Commerce. Same kind of development. And you can see, again, they have that additional setback that they were allowed to do based on that 15 to 25 from the back of the curb and gutter, no more than the 25.
And they recently introduced parking right in front of the building as well.
Yep, utilizing that space. So those are the things that we are recommending as changes right now. There could be future things that we need to address as well. I'm going to be honest with you and tell you we've addressed this fairly quickly on the heels of the zone change request, recognizing it's kind of the first thing coming through, and we want to be able to address it well. We may need to make adjustments. We're open to suggestions. But the findings we did make, and I'll just quickly address this, these are in keeping with the purposes of the general plan. In your report, I called out our general plan asks us to do a couple of things. One of the objectives was to encourage a form-based development pattern at smaller commercial nodes to support multiple modes of access and mobility. And the strategy to support that was to create a neighborhood mixed-use zoning designation and support it with form-based development and design guidelines. This is a kind of a first step toward doing that, toward making a mixed-use zone that is more sort of neighborhood-oriented, village-oriented, as opposed to the transit station-oriented mixed-use zone that we have currently. I don't know that eventually maybe they wind up being different zones. Right now, this is the first step that we felt like we could take relatively quickly. Yeah, go ahead.
So while Jared was explaining that to you guys, I just did a quick calculation. So this goes back to the ground floor commercial requirements. I did a quick calculation. Take a building like Home 2 Suites just right over here. Under the current code, if a building just like that were to be built, it would require 16,726 square feet of retail space on the bottom floor. However, under this proposed ordinance, it would only require 10,500. So it reduces it by almost 6,000 square feet, which is pretty large considering some of your, what's going on with retail and things like that at this point. So I just wanted to give that quick little thing that I just kind of measured out. So I'll let Jared get back to that. I just wanted to give that number real quick.
Thank you. All right, commissioners, do you have any questions?
It's a lot of
We're going to
information.
open it up to public comment.
Yep. It is a public
Unless you
hearing.
want to ask questions.
Let's hear public, I guess. Do you have any?
Public, and then I'll ask my question.
All right.
I'll leave it on findings until you tell me otherwise. If you want to.
All right. I will open this agenda item up for public comment. Anyone here would like to comment regarding this item? Seeing none, I will close public comment and give commissioners opportunity to ask staff questions.
Okay, here's my question slash comment. Just looking in use number 1210 and 1515 that Travis kind of talked about a little bit in pre-meeting. It shows that there's no density limit on either of those classifications, which are rooming and boarding houses and transient apartments rented by the day or week. Is there a reason why we don't have a density limit on those two items?
Yeah, because they were not on my radar as I was doing this. I was looking at the high-rise condominiums and high-rise apartments that we've typically seen.
But we could put one on.
Apply it to them very easily, and that's probably appropriate.
Okay.
They just weren't included.
I just hate to
because-
see anything with a blank check.
Yeah, and we've never processed an application for those. We've only
I
processed.
don't think we
applications.
ever will either.
We may never.
Well,
And-
At
Right,
least,
and we may
it comes
never,
in
but-
that that comes in where we're getting into that kind of density.
If you all would be all right with me either adding that density language to those uses or striking them from the potential uses, I will do either. I'm not sure what you'd rather see. At the moment, I'm not prepared to say they should be struck. They should at least be applied the same logic.
Jared, I guess, and you're going to love this, it's not quite chickens and bees, but it is tiny houses, so
Yeah.
does that fall into?
Tiny houses would not be one of these categories.
Okay.
They're and we don't prohibit, for the record, we don't prohibit tiny houses. It's just super difficult to do them. You'd have to do them.
But you can't do tiny houses in mixed use.
The building codes would prohibit. Well, they're single-family detached homes, no matter how you slice them, and that's not one of the allowed uses.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. I just wanted to bring them up for you.
Since we were talking about condominiums, tell me the difference, in your opinion, in a condominium versus an apartment building, and why densities would matter more or less in one.
They matter exactly the same. To me, the density there is literally no difference. One can be owned, under Utah's laws, one can be owned and one can't. Or one can be owned by the occupant and the other.
Do you think the type of residents that live there impact the zone differently? An owner occupied versus a transient in and out, in and out, in and out turnover?
I don't think that the ownership style affects those outcomes as much as the unit size. So for example, around the transit stations, we mostly see 1 and 2 bedroom units being built. In one that's further flung, even a mixed-use development that's outside a mile, you might see 3 bedrooms or even 4 bedrooms, and that's going to impact things differently than that. Whether it's owned or rented, it's going to impact things differently.
Okay.
But the likelihood, I don't see a difference, really. No.
Okay, fair enough.
Any other questions for me?
I think I have a question. We'll see. It's under the, where is it? Building requirements, number B. At the end of, it's at the top of the page, number B, or letter B, sorry. At the last sentence says darkly tinted windows and mirrored windows which block two-way visibility are prohibited as ground floor windows. That's always seems interesting to me, especially in this day and age. You see more, I think, I could be wrong, you see more wraps and mural type stickers. I'm wondering if it should be, and then blocking sun should be worded something like better.
Well, you can use shade devices. You can use awnings and things like that, and we allow up to 50% of windows that are retailed to be covered by signs.
That's what I was about to say. A
Window signs can
percentage.
cover 50% of that
It's
surface.
the
percentage
sign
of the
code
ground
that
floor
comes into
windows.
play there.
But that's exactly, Commissioner Markham. It's the sign code. So what it's trying to prohibit is sort of reflective, unfriendly. I don't want to use really soft terms like unfriendly, but unfriendly architecture like spandrel glass. That doesn't improve the activity on the street like that clear glass does.
So can we talk about walkability a little bit
You
and
bet.
get into the area width, frontage, and yard regulations? I've noticed that you have added drive-throughs into the
Into horizontal mixed use, well, anything with a master site plan. So and the reason for that being, if there's a master site plan or let's say there's a horizontal mixed use project that includes pad sites, restaurants, standalone restaurants, or offices. Restaurants are the only ones going to use drive-throughs, but facing a larger street, and then the residential behind it is kind of a natural response to that site to develop it that way. If that's the case, what we don't want to see is that there could be a case where we don't want to see the drive-throughs for those restaurants wrapping the backside of the building and separating them effectively from easy access from those dwelling units that are nearby.
Do we want to see them in the frontage?
I'd rather see them in that 20 foot of frontage on a busier street where this is more likely to happen than I would separating them from the use, from the dwellings anyway. I think, but again, I haven't seen a site designed that way. I want to be able to accommodate it.
I know we can't say that it's the multi-use zone, but State Street, I think when you look at Starbucks and you look at Chick-fil-A, I just don't think it's real visually appealing. There is some separation for the pedestrian trying to walk around there, but a lot of times when you have it there, someone that's approaching from the street, Chick-fil-A is a great example of this, the crosswalk that a pedestrian's going to walk through is constantly blocked with vehicles.
Sure.
I tap on cars often as they try to run me over in that area right there.
And I guess
Chick-fil-A.
Yes.
I thought you were just saying hi.
I'm not saying hi. I'm usually saying quite a bit.
I guess my thinking on that, and State Street being a good example, my thinking on that would be that I would rather not prohibit the possibility of doing a drive-through in those areas. I'd rather leave that up to the design of the specific site. So what I'm trying to do here is not regulate and say, we're going to have drive-throughs between all buildings and street frontages, but rather, if it calls for it, if the site needs it to be there, let's not prohibit ourselves from doing it.
I really want to just, my own personal opinion, caution you with allowing this in the MCCD zone. I mean, I think that's an area where I don't think that type of development should be there, and I don't want to see it there.
It may be much less appropriate in that downtown zone, right? And that's a good point. And this is, to that point too, this is kind of the first of maybe several other zoning changes or text amendments coming for other zones as well. And you're right, Travis, in the MCCD it's much less appropriate. And in the mixed use it might be very inappropriate, for example, right by the station at Murray Crossing. If that were done horizontally, that would probably be inappropriate. On 9th East, I'm not sure that it's going to be inappropriate.
Right. Do you want to talk about, we'll go back to your parking that you presented earlier. Have you thought about putting a cap on the size of the project so you will only go up to 125% on a 4-acre or less? Because when you get to a 20-acre site or a 15-acre site, then that suddenly becomes a lot of ground being moved over into parking.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would probably be more likely to do that maybe here. And this is, so I should specify, if you look at the red line copy, there are two kind of broad categories of parking. Those where 25% or more of the parking is provided off-street in surface lots, more than 25%, or the other is, I forget the wording on the other one. If 75% or more is in structures already, it has different, you can do less parking if you're putting it in structures, basically. And we didn't make any modifications to that, so these things wouldn't apply there. Maybe that there's a more appropriate way to do that. I can't, on the fly at the podium, I'm not sure. We didn't consider that really kind of grading the parking back based on the size. But it's a good response because I am concerned more with the parking on a smaller development.
And I hadn't even considered the smaller development. It was your discussion that actually really put the two together for me.
Those are the ones that sort of, I don't know if 4 acres, but
I have no idea.
Less than 5, yeah.
I have no idea what that number is.
The larger ones are 5 and 7 acre sites, and less than that probably doesn't need as much an increase in parking, or can absorb it, or is more likely to be able to afford to put it in structures. So that's worth looking at, yeah, actually. I can't really speak to it very well tonight, but it is worth looking at, definitely.
And I think you guys did a good job. I like the changes.
You're too kind. We were working fast.
All right. Any other comments, commissioners? Questions? We'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion. I would recommend that the Planning Commission forward a recommendation of approval to the City Council for the proposed amendments to the Murray City Land Use Ordinance, Section 17.146, mixed use, M-U zoning.
And I'll second.
A motion and a second. Is there any other discussion? Right. Jared, would you do a roll call vote, please?
Will, thank you. Ms. Milkevich. No, sorry, Ms. Wilson.
Yes.
Mr. May.
Yes.
Mr. Woodbury.
Yes.
Mr. Markle.
Yes.
Ms. Milkevich?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Thank you.
So motion passes, recommendation of approval be forwarded to the city council for their consideration.
We'll,
Right.
as staff, we'll look at all of those kind of things that we talked about and make some changes as it goes forward to council and apprise you of those as it goes forward, okay?
Great,
We'll do
thank
that
you.
in real time, so we'll memo you out on the changes that are being made.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good.
Appreciate it.
Is there any other business from the staff and commissioners? Great. Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay.
Second.
Yeah.
Any disapprove? All right,
Yeah.
we are adjourned.